Hello everyone, can you hear me? That hello, am I audible?
Reply, DG.
Hello,
Yeah, we can hear you.
good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the portrait webinar on global workforce integrity, innovation technology, compliance, and trust in inclusive and cross-border engagement. My name is Ekem and I will be your moderator for today. While we are here, we are still waiting for our speakers. Let's be patient, they will be with us in a very short time. While waiting, we can post our portrait advert for our attendees to see, our guests to see what we have on.
Benin slide. Who is Bemi? Who is Bemi? Who is Bemi? What's his other name? Eh?
Did you say this slide? She's presenting his own slide by herself.
Yes, the speaker said they are presenting the slide by themselves now.
Nobody said any slide.
I mean, now send it. Send it now. Okay. So which one? Where will I start from? I only saw twist today. Medium twist today. Okay. Please. Hello. Okay. Yeah. She knows sabi this thing. I swear. I swear because she dey busy people. HR is supposed to do general introduction, introduce MD or introduce post-rec, introduce what post-rec is all about. You understand? Then after the introduction, they will now start all these inviting speakers. Please do the general introduction. At least spend like 10-15 minutes doing introduction. Talk about the whole stuff about post-rec. She knows sabi this. No say na first us dey handle this thing before. It's not her job.
That's like, madam.
Nancy Andula. She wants to handle it. I don't tell am now. She never read my message. Hmm? Hello? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Now. You have not even done introduction. You have not even done general intro. People are leaving. Like five people have left. Start it now. Start it now. Start it. Hmm? HR just dey vex me like this. She said she no plan this thing before she starts this thing. Yeah? We don't start program we waiting for speaker. At least talk like 15-20 minutes. If you no sabi something, go ask questions. She was kuma say she no sabi this. Man, another person do the moderating. And she's supposed to come to office today. This thing, you know, to start, supposed to at least come to office. Why is this guy taking me to last year event?
So can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Why you came doing like this now? What's doing about this now? Eh? She's she's not saying anything now.
Supposed to make you talk about portrait. What do you do for portrait? It should be the introduction. I don't just talk to speaker. Speaker just want. So I said that way for
Yeah, yeah. The words I don't even know the speaker self. Make I even check.
yes, 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 yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Oh,
I think Mr. Kemi is having a network issue, so I'll be doing the introduction to the speakers.
Hello, am I audible? Hello, can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Portrait webinar on global integrity, innovation, technology, compliance, and trust recruitment and cross-border engagements. My name is Inke, and I will be your moderator for today. As the global workforce continues to evolve, organizations must navigate new challenges, recruitment, technology, and compliance. We are excited to have an engaging speakers who will share their expertise and will encourage you to actively participate in this discussion. Before we go on, let me give a little introduction of the webinar and its importance. Workforce integrity is more just compliance, foundation of trust in recruitment and business sustainability. As companies expand globally, the need for innovation, ethical hiring, and regulations adherence becomes crucial. This webinar is designed to provide practical insights into how technology, compliance, and strategy engagement can enhance recruitment practices across borders. Our speakers will explore key trends, challenges, and solutions that define the future workforce management. For Portrek is owned by the Morgans Consulting. Portrek Resourcing is a global recruitment and HR solution provider dedicated to matching up top talents, leading organizations at various sectors. We offer comprehensive services including executive search, talent resourcing, payroll management, and umbrella company solution. Our processes, we have permanent recruitment, we have contract recruitment, we have background checks. Our services ranges from employment checks, academic qualification, and other areas recruiting the job seekers authentication, criminal record check, and reference check. This is for Portrait, and for this webinar, we have two great speakers. Our first speaker that will be coming on board is not that person than Mr. Bubemi Atimomo. Mr. Bubemi Atimomo is an HR and business consultant and entrepreneurship advocate. He's an experienced consultant and human resource generalist personnel who has developed expertise in identifying national issues, proposing solutions, and working with stakeholders to achieve a resolution. Today, he will be sharing insights on twists today, shedding light on key strategies and solutions for a more effective and ethical replacement process. Please join me as we welcome Orishe Bubemi Atimomo. Sir, you can take the stage.
What is his name? Let me. His okay.
Mr. Bubemi, are you there?
I don't know. Hang on.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Okay.
You're welcome, sir. You're welcome, sir.
One more comment. Just slides.
Which of the topic are we on? Which of the topic?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Yes. I assume you're going to do my slides, or should I do that myself?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you can do that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Please confirm that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, you can see your screen.
Yes, see your screen.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for having me today. Uh, as introduced, my name is Bubemi Atimomo, and I am an HR and business consultant. I run a firm called Business in Tandem Limited, where we provide HR consulting and advisory services to firms. Thank you very much, Portrait, for inviting me to share at today's webinar. The theme for today is Global Workforce Integrity, Innovation, Technology, Compliance, and Trust in Recruitment and Cross-Border Engagement. So what I have done is just carve out an aspect of that theme to focus on. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be discussing regulatory challenges and best practices in global talent acquisition, navigating Africa's evolving workforce landscape. So what I have also taken the liberty of doing is localizing this presentation to Africa, because Africa is, in my opinion, is what concerns us. Yes, there's the globe beyond Africa, but my preference is also just to focus a bit more on Africa. I will make references to other continents as well, but
Africa will be sort of our focus. That's okay. So today we'll be looking at the African talent landscape, cross-border hiring in Africa, key regulatory challenges, best practices for global talent acquisition in Africa. I will also talk through personal experience I've had hiring across Africa. And we'll now take a look at future trends in Africa's global talent market. And we'll sum up with key takeaways from today's presentation. So Africa is a brain hub for global talent, attracting multinational companies and startups. Even in Nigeria, if we look at Nigeria, we have a lot of international companies that are present here, from bank, where we have like Standard Chartered Bank, or we have Stanbic IBTC Trust Bank, which exists as Stanbic IBTC Bank, rather, sorry, which exists as Stanbic Bank across parts of Africa. If we look at hospitality, for example, we have hotels like Radisson. We have Marriott's Hotel. These hotels also exist across Africa, outside of Africa as well. If we look at other sectors, for example, if we look at financial services, we have Rand Merchant Bank, which also exists across Africa. So we can pinpoint various sectors across Africa where we have companies, sorry, not just across Africa, rather across the world, where we have global companies that are also present in Nigeria. We also have companies that have started from Nigeria and have gone outside of Africa. So banking, again, we have banks like Guarantee Trust Bank, Access Bank, that have launched their footprints outside of Nigeria within Africa. We have startups like Flutterwave, what's the other payment solution again? I can't really recall now. We have quite a number of other startups as well that started in, have gone to operate from, outside Nigeria, across Africa, and some even across the world, providing services across the world. We know that Africa is what we sort of term like the emerging continent. Emerging because we don't appear to have reached our full potential with regards to like the Asians or Europe or the Americas. But irrespective of that, Africa is also a hub and is also a market for global companies. Hiring across African countries requires navigating complex regulatory environments. This is because within Africa, unfortunately, we have not achieved as much synergy as we have as other global nations, global continents have. So within the EU, within Europe, for example, they have the EU, which represents a union of 20 plus countries that have come together to provide sort of like a borderless environment. So starting from issuing a single visa that allows access to all those 20 plus countries, streamlining work permits, hiring practices, using one currency. These things have been set in place to make it easier to business within the countries that are, aligned under the European Union. Now, within Africa, we have like ECOWAS, we have the SAC, and other regional blocks. But what we have found out is that even within, for example, like ECOWAS, the synergies have not been as optimized as they could have. Now, even across all of the regions, so West tallying with East, with the North, with the South, with the Central, we find that there are still issues regarding how people do business. There's still a lot of challenge, even as little as flying across countries. So, for example, Cameroon is just next to Nigeria. But to get to Cameroon, there's a likelihood that you first of all have to fly to maybe Ghana, and then from Ghana to Cameroon. Or you have to fly to Ivory Coast, and then from Ivory Coast to Cameroon. There are no direct flights between Nigeria or Cameroon, or there are no stops, or continuous flights. So let's say an originating flight from Cote d'Ivoire, for example, which could ordinarily have stopped in Nigeria and then made a final stop in Cameroon. We don't have those kind of flights. So those are the kind of challenges that business face and ultimately affect recruitment and hiring practices across Africa. So my presentation today explores the challenges and best practices in acquiring and managing talent across Africa and ensuring compliance through that process. So Africa represents the fastest growing workforce in the world. It's expected to reach a total of about 1.1 billion people by 2025, 2035, sorry, which is 10 years from now. Africa has the youngest population. That population is already primed to provide, services across not just Africa but across the world. So we represent a good pool of talents, not just for work and services within Africa, but also outside of Africa, as we have seen lately with migration trends of people moving from Nigeria, not just even Nigeria, but from various parts of Africa to countries like America, to Europe, for example, continents like Europe, Asia, Australia, because there are vacancies and there are jobs, there are opportunities for talents to move there. So within Africa, we have rapid urbanization and digital transformation, which is also driving employment. So what we're saying is that there's not just opportunities for Africans outside of Africa, even within Africa, there's a lot of opportunity for talent to be able to find work. High demand industries remain technology, finance, energy, and manufacturing. And most of the key challenges that we face within Africa: skills gap, regulatory inconsistencies, and infrastructure rehabilitation. Still skills gap because yes, we have a vibrant workforce, but a lot of them may not necessarily have the skills that align with the opportunities that exist, not just even within Africa, but also outside of the continent. So cross-border hiring in Africa represents both an opportunity and a challenge. Global companies seek skilled professionals but face legal and compliance hurdles in engaging those professionals. So we have companies, for example, that would set up, come from, let's say, Europe and set up in Nigeria. Getting skilled professionals in some cases may be hard. You understand? And they may also want to also launch out into other African countries. So the typical practice is you use one launch to prepare for another launch. So what I mean, for example, this company A comes into Nigeria, they have plans of expanding into Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa. So they come in, they build capacity in Nigeria, and then they will take some of that capacity they built in Nigeria together with some of the existing capacities that they brought from Europe and move into all of the other countries so that they can also build capacity. And this is largely because in some cases, capacity either does not exist or does not exist to the quality that they require in those countries. So it's very important that employers must understand employment laws, tax regulations, and data privacy concerns, even as they plan to expand into those countries and hire talent within those locations. So key regulatory challenges that exist in global talent acquisition, these are just like the headlines, and I will speak in detail about each and every one of them. So work permits and visas with unique country requirements. Think about the fact that we have 54 countries within Africa, 55 if we add Western Sahara, which is not officially recognized but still exists as a country. Each of these countries have their various visa requirements, various work permits, regulations, complex labor laws, 55 labor laws across Africa, 55 different employment contracts and styles existing across Africa. Each country also has their own taxation and social security obligations, different not just even by region, but also by country. Data protection laws as well. So not all African countries have data protection laws or have updated data protection laws, but these things still exist. So each country has different requirements under each of their data protection laws. So imagine a company trying to expand from South Africa to Kenya to Togo to Libya to Mozambique. They will also have to get updated with all of the data privacy laws in each of those countries. And then also cultural and ethical considerations as well, which affects talent acquisition. So I'll take each of these one by one. So when we consider work permits and visa requirements, foreign workers require permits, which are often hard to obtain. When we talk about the case study, like I said, I'll share a bit of my experience in this area, hiring across Africa, and I'll give a bit more context. So, for example, before anyone comes to work in Nigeria, they must have either obtained a temporary work visa or process a work permit. There are different regulations, different guidelines for that. Consider also the same for Kenya, for Egypt, for all of these African countries. Each ones have their unique regulations, unique timelines to process these visas, which represent challenges for whichever country is trying to expand into those locations. Some African nations prioritize local hiring before granting work permits. So, for example, in Kenya, you need to be sure that you need to confirm, even in Nigeria, you need to confirm that there is no local talent that can take up that role, which is why you are looking to bring in a foreigner. And sometimes it's not even enough to ensure that there's no local talent. You also confirm that when you bring in this foreign talent, that foreign talent will only stay for a certain amount of time, but they will build capacity in the locals, such that by the time that foreign talent is expected to leave, there's local capacity that will be developed, not just in one person, but in any number of other people. South Africa, for example, also makes this a bit easier for companies because they have what they call a critical skills list, much like the skilled worker list in the UK, which provides a list of jobs where foreigners can be employed to. So all jobs that are not provided in that list are not open to foreigners. That's sort of like the implications. So upfront, companies can go and check and confirm what jobs are on the critical skills list so that they can fast track work permits for their employees going into those regions. Companies also need to understand the processing times of all these visas and permits so that they can plan for it and know how to manage their manpower during during this processing period. So in some cases, it could take anything from a few days or a few weeks. In Rwanda, for example, because Rwanda has actively tried to make sure that they make it easy for foreign companies to come and do business in their country. So anything to several months in countries like sometimes even Nigeria in some cases, in Egypt, in Kenya, where these things take much longer time. When we talk about labor laws and employment contracts, and I think this is one of the toughest things, each country has to ensure that they abide by their labor laws. So imagine a Nigerian company, let's say, let me think of a company, a local Nigerian company that manufactures, let's say, biscuits, and then wants to, have a branch in Senegal, in Mauritania, in Eritrea, in Mozambique, in Tanzania, in Angola. They need to be conversant with the labor laws operational in each of those countries. Because the Nigerian labor law and practice, as they know it, and has been guiding their company operations, would be inadequate for them to operate in each of these countries. So they need to understand the labor laws of all of those countries and customize their employment contracts according to the labor laws of each of these countries. So types of employment that we have: permanent employment, where you hire someone, the contract is open-ended. They can leave when they choose to, or when the employer, no longer need their services, which will be communicated, the terms of which will be communicated in the agreement. These also vary by country. Or contract employment, where there's a definite timeline. So you say we're hiring you for 3 months, for 6 months, for 2 years. There's a start date, there's an end date. Or there's a temporary employment, which is a bit more flexible, sort of like contract employment, but it's more sort of more open-ended in that sense. Or gig workers. So gig workers is more uh, is a form of employment that is where the employee is more in control. Quote and unquote, a gig worker is not necessarily an employee. They are sort of more like a free agent, and they can offer their services, to companies in whatever locations. So when we talk about gig workers, for example, we don't necessarily consider them in terms of employment within companies, because the gig worker is a free agent. They are their own company, quote and unquote. So each country, in line with their labor laws, in line with employment contracts, have strict laws on termination, benefits, and employee protections to make sure that they look out for their employees and their employees are covered. So I've had colleagues tell me, for example, that in countries like Kenya, countries like South Africa, you can't just wake up and fire an employee like that. Even in Nigeria, at some point, you could fire an employee and say their services are no longer required. You didn't need to explain, but there have been changes now with recent pronouncements, in the industrial court. So countries will, as much as possible, try to make sure that they protect their citizens with regards to employment practices. Some nations also have strict contract formats and severance pay required, that must follow with whatever contracts are offered to their employees. So Kenya, for example, will mandate that if you're going to hire an employee and the contract, the term of the employment will exceed 3 months, they must receive the contract of employment, which is somewhat similar with Nigeria, because in Nigeria, for example, the existing labor law says if the contract of employment is less than 3 months, you may not necessarily need to give them a contract of employment, but if it exceeds 3 months, you need to issue a contract of employment. South Africa, for example, also requires that even if it's a fixed term contract, such that we have agreed that you will start work on February 1st, you will end work on August 31st. You must send a reminder to that employee by August 1st to say that your employment will end by August 31st. Because if you fail to send a reminder to that employee, they are free to show up on September 1st and you are liable for pay for the whole of September because you did not send a reminder to them that their contract was going to end as of the dates that you had previously agreed. So this is irrespective of the fact that you have a contract document that clearly states this. You must also send a reminder when that contract is about to expire. So taxation and social security compliance, which is also very key, because all countries will charge some form of employment tax. But how the employment tax is computed is dependent on the country. Aside from the employment tax, countries also have things like the welfare tax, for example. Some have some sort of social security tax, so it's important that you understand what each country, requires to be deducted from employee pay, and you understand how those taxes are computed, those other deductions are also computed, so that you can abide by them. Some countries have treaties to prevent double taxation. So, for example, if you hired an American to come and work in Nigeria, for example, or you hired an UK citizen to come and work in Nigeria, fine, they're earning some income, but there must be some sort of disclosure with their home country to say that they're no longer in their home country, they're in this location, this is what they're earning, and this is what they are taxing. In some cases, America will require those nationals to also remit some tax back to America, even though they are not working in America. So it's important to understand how this ties in with the offer that you make, and understand exactly what obligations are required in those kind of situations, so that you don't end up paying tax twice on behalf of your employees. Data protection and employee privacy regulation is also another very key issue. Not a lot of companies have considered this, but the awareness is becoming greater and greater as the world becomes more of a global living room, not just a global village. So, for example, Nigeria has the NDPR, which is our own data protection regulation, and it stipulates various requirements as to what kind of information that can be collected, how it should be stored, how long that information should be kept for, and how it applies to the companies. South Africa also has a what they call a POPI Act, which is I think privacy. I can't quite remember. I think I had. Let me just check that again because I remember I spelled it out. Yes, Protection of Personal Information Act. Which stipulates also the kind of information that you can collect, how you can store that information, how you can transfer it. Kenya also has the same thing. So all of these acts exist to protect their citizens in regards to the kind of information you can request, how you can store that information, how long you can keep that information for, what you can even use that information for. So, for example, in Nigeria, I remember, we sent out a reference to a previous employer on behalf of an employee that we had hired, and that previous employer wrote back to us and said they need to first of all receive the previous employees' consent that they can release data about them. So these are new things that are coming up now in Nigeria. Not a lot of companies know, but it's very important that you need to seek a previous employee's consent to release data to a new employee. How we also secure that HR data is also very important. So those are things that companies need to also consider and think about. And then finally, cultural and ethical hiring considerations are very, very important because we need to ensure that recruitment practices are fair across the continent. Africa is a continent of that, I'd mentioned 54, 55 countries and territories. Within Nigeria alone, we have over 400 tribes. So we can imagine how many tribes there are across Africa, probably almost up to 1,000 or more. So in a country like South Africa, for example, they call themselves the Rainbow Nation. And they call themselves the Rainbow Nation because they recognize the various tribes, nationalities that make up the country. So they don't just have Black Africans, for example. They have, I would say white Africans, quote unquote, the Afrikaners, which are the descendants of the Dutch people that came into South Africa, and they have, I think, about 7 to 11 official languages within South Africa. So those are the kind of things that we need to consider, because that's a nation that clearly supports diversity and inclusion practices. And those are things that, new companies need to consider when they're going for regions. We also need to understand cultural nuances in hiring practices. So for example, the Nigerian business culture has become much adapted to very much like Western practices, where, for example, when we do interviews, we expect candidates to look us in the eye, we expect them to speak confidently, we expect them to, sort of brag about what it is they've done. But these cultural practices may not necessarily exist across Africa, even in other countries. In some places, you expect a bit more modesty from candidates. So you can imagine a Nigerian hiring manager going to hire in a country where modesty is more like the business culture, and they don't understand why candidates appear a bit more demure and calm, and they're not necessarily pushing themselves out there. So those are things that people need to consider. And then avoiding discrimination based on gender, ethnicity, nationality, all those things are very, very important. So best practices for global talent acquisition. Companies need to ensure that they align hiring strategies with local labor regulations. Before that, they need to understand those local labor regulations so they can align them. Companies need to work with local HR and legal experts for compliance. That is very important. You can't just step into a location and assume that the knowledge, the processes that you have from the country will apply in this new country. You also need to work with people on the ground so that they can advise as to what to do and how to do it. Companies also need to ensure clear and legally sound employment contracts are issued to candidates. You can't just take the template that operates in your country and assume that you apply in this new country. You need to localize those contracts. And then companies need to ensure that they use structured hiring frameworks to ensure workforce integrity. So as much as possible, you want to make sure that your hiring practices are similar across two of our sorry, across more of our countries, and just not necessarily in your country. But even as much as possible, you want to make sure that there's that little gap that ensures that the individuality of each country is also considered in structuring the hiring practices. Sorry, I'm just trying to move up because I suspect that my time is fast running
Yes,
out.
your slides are not moving. Can
My
you
slides
hear
are
me?
not moving.
Your slides are not moving. Yes,
Oh, my slides have not moved at all.
not at all.
Oh, that's a problem. Can you still see the title slide now?
Streamlining work permits and visa applications. Yes.
Okay, so I think it was because I was on presentation mode. That's why. Okay. So you didn't see this slide, best practices for global talent acquisition?
Yes.
You didn't see this one?
We didn't see any of the
Okay.
slides.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I wish you had mentioned earlier that I would just stop the presentation mode. I assume the presentation mode was what would make the slides display. So I'll just use the normal mode going forward. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so as part of best practices as well, companies need to ensure that they streamline countries rather, because these are sort of advices to countries and companies. It would help Africa a lot if we all spoke the same language, quote unquote. And when I'm in language, I don't necessarily mean the audible language, but if we all, as much as possible, try to streamline our practices to make things easier, such like how the European Union has done. Now we have what is called the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, which is supposed to move us towards that. What that aims to do is to make sure that Africa becomes sort of like a single market. But as much as possible, not all countries have subscribed to it. One, even those that have subscribed to it, not all fully implemented all of these things. There are a lot of challenges that these present. Now, companies need to make sure that they engage immigration consultants to ensure compliance in all of these locations. You don't just send people to a country on a visit visa, for example, when you expect them to be working from there. Because those countries you cannot work on a visit visa. Companies must also sort of ensure that they establish an in-country presence and not just be operating from their home country while sort of trying to set up in the new country without no presence. Companies must also leverage government partnerships, as much as possible to smoothing the hiccups in their setting up and hiring practices. And then digitalize documentation and application processes. I'd mentioned before about crafting sound employment contracts. Some companies require some sort of mandatory clauses stated in the employment contract. So you cannot necessarily take the employment contract from Togo, which is the francophone country, to Angola, which is more of a Portuguese-speaking country, and expect that that contract will be applicable. Companies also need to address taxation, dispute resolution, and termination conditions, as much as possible localizing to each of these countries where they operate. In some cases, for example, like Egypt, they require that agreements must be in triplicate. One copy would be in Arabic, another can be in English, and the other, can be in whatever other language it is. But they require at least these copies and also sent to their local employment board. Now, I don't know if they enforce it, but tax compliance and payroll practices, which is essentially very key, because if you hire people, they start work, you need to pay them. You need to be sure that you're paying the correct taxes per country. You need to be sure that you're making the right deductions per country. So it's important to partner with local tax advisors to be able to advise on what taxes are applicable, what deductions are applicable. If employees are coming in as expatriates as well. What practices can you adopt to be able to help them get the best from the compensation that you agree with them? Navigating data protection laws is also very, very important. It's important to find out what data protection laws exist per country and ensure that you comply with them. So, for example, some countries will require that you cannot store employee data on the cloud solution. A cloud solution is something that exists outside of the physical database. So whether I'm in Cairo, whether I'm in London, whether I'm in Melbourne, whether I'm in Singapore, whether I'm in New York, I can access it. Some countries say no, that data must be physically stored in our country. So you cannot have access to it outside of our country. Some other countries are predisposed towards cloud solutions. So those are the kind of things that companies need to find out in guiding how they store, manage, and access employee data. So leveraging technology is also very key. Adopting AI-powered document tools and ensuring that they're also compliant. Digital signing of contracts and applications, adopting HR tech platforms. In some cases, they are multi-country HR platforms that you can deploy, and your operations, if they exist across countries, all of your employees can sign up to that platform and use them irrespective of whatever location that they are. So let me talk a bit about an experience that I had last year working with a company that planned to expand across Africa. Now, for that company, their ultimate plan was to have a presence in each of the African countries. And they had sort of a timeline to be able to establish that. But we first of all starting by launching us into Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, Cameroon, and I think was it Morocco? One country in each of all of these regional locations. Now, one of the key things was identifying, for example, what languages are spoken in all of these countries. So in Africa, the four official languages are English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. Aside from all the other local languages that are spoken in those countries, it was also important to find out how to hire in all of these countries, the 6 countries that I mentioned. How do we hire in those countries? Who do we approach to sort out our hiring? How do we get referrals, for example? How are people paid in this country? So one thing that company said was, you know what, I don't want to adopt a situation whereby I'm paying one way in Egypt, I'm paying another way in Nigeria. I want to be able to, as much as possible, pay the basic pay the same way across all countries. So what they said was, for example, in Nigeria, we have like leave allowance. In some other countries, they have maybe like a meal allowance and all of that. He said no. The client said no. What we want to do is offer one basic pay across all of these countries in Africa. Now, we did our research and we found out that there was not necessarily any restriction to doing that. And what they also said was we're going to benchmark our pay in US dollars. In countries that do not have a restriction, we pay in US dollars. In countries that have a restriction, we convert to US dollars and pay it in their local currency. So one other thing we had to figure out while planning for these clients was the data that we access. So CVs, employment documentation, and all of that. That's how do we store this data? We needed a platform that will be able to across all of the countries, and then employees will be able to sign up to that platform and provide their data, whilst also considering each country's limitations to how that data is stored, accessed, and retrieved. So what we did was we found a partner that we were discussing with, and that partner was able to assure us that they had these capabilities. One other thing that we also had a challenge with was the employment contracts, because we realized very quickly that we needed to get employment contracts that would be applicable in each country, and they would be different. So as much as possible, whilst the spirit of those contracts may be similar in terms of some certain languages, there will be clauses in each of all of these countries, contracts, that would apply to the countries where those contracts would be enforceable. Because as much as possible, you don't want to take a Nigerian contract and issue it to somebody in Rwanda, for example. They will not be enforceable. You know. So those were some of the things that we found out. And then in also helping them to plan for background checks, we had to find out as well what kind of information is permissible to be requested for in each of these countries. You know, what the background check companies that we're going to work with, you know, to what extent will they be able to also retain that information, or what can they even provide to us? So these were some of the things that we encountered and considered whilst we're working with that client last year. So some future trends that I foresee in Africa's global talent market is the rise of remote work and digital nomad visa. So this is already existing, but not all African countries, for example, have a nomad visa or a remote work visa. So a country like, I think Mauritius already has some sort of visa like that. I think Rwanda also has a similar thing. So these are more common in European countries, in South American countries, where you can get a visa from your country, and that visa says you can work for your company. You're a Nigerian who works for a Nigerian company, but you can come to my country and continue to work for your Nigerian company while you're in my country. As long as you earn a certain minimum amount of money, you pay these taxes and levies, you spend this period of time in my country. In some cases, those visas, you know, can be a route to citizenship. In some other cases, they are not a route to citizenship. So there's also the increasing efforts by governments to streamline work permits. So in Nigeria, for example, ever since we had the Buhari administration, there was a body called the PEDEC, which is the Presidential Enabling Business Access Committee. And what that committee's role was to look at all of our Nigerian laws that affect businesses, look at processes, and seek to improve these laws and processes so that companies coming into Nigeria will find it easier to establish their operations in Nigeria. So a lot of other African countries have similar things where they're trying to make things easier for employees. And then we also have the impact of the EFCCA that I had mentioned, which impacts on labor mobility and regional hiring, and then growing use of AI in talent acquisition and management. So in conclusion, key takeaways, hiring in Africa presents challenges but also great opportunities. Compliance with labor laws, tax policies, and data protection is very critical. Companies must adopt best practices and leverage technology, and partnering with local experts ensures smoother recruitment processes. Thank you very much. So I believe the slides will be made available to everyone. So for the parts that we didn't see, we'll be able to catch up with that as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Budemi. This is an insightful presentation. We want to say thank you for your time. We have time for questions and answers, but this will be done after our commercial break. We have a 10 minutes commercial break from the IT department team. So our guests, our attendees, please stay tuned. When we are back, we'll move on to questions and answers section. Please get your questions ready. You can send your questions to the chat group,
message me, make us see
or you can ask your questions orally. So, Mr. Budemi, please don't go away. We are still waiting for you to come on board to answer our questions. Thank you very much.
I'm staying here. Thank you very much, Madam.
Over to the IT department.
Nobody should say anything. I'm sharing this thing. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Please, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. I've turned on the mic for everyone, so you can raise your hand up while you're admitted to ask your question. Thank you. Actually, how? Please, if you have question, just raise your hand. I'll show emoji so we can put your name down. Thank you.
We just look for 10 points. No 10 points. So just send us to your WhatsApp.
A lot of people use the word excellence. We deliver. We are ink and paper. We are what you need to succeed. For business cards, magazines, brochures, to everything in between and beyond. We make your communication stand out. We are committed to your project. The only thing we don't print is money. We are Time Print. Contact us today. A lot of people use the word excellence. We deliver. We are not just ink and paper. We are what you need to succeed. For business cards, magazines, handbills, to everything in between and beyond. We make your communication stand out. We are committed to your project. The only thing we don't print is money. We are Time Print. Contact us today. A lot of people use the word excellence. We deliver. We are not just ink and paper. We are what you need to succeed. For business cards, magazines, handbills, brochures, to everything in between and beyond. We make your communication stand out. We are committed to your project. The only thing we don't print is money. We are Time Print. Contact us today.
Welcome back, everyone. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Welcome back. Welcome back, our speaker, Mr. Bubemi. Once again, thank you for that insightful presentation you've given us this afternoon. This is time for questions. Please, if you have any questions for our speaker, you can drop your questions on the chat, or you can ask questions and it will answer you. As for me, I have my question. I don't know if Mr. Bubemi is here.
Yeah.
Mr. Bubemi, can you hear me?
I'm here. I'm responding to you. I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I can. So I have a question. I have three questions. And the first question is on data protection. You mentioned data protection between cross borders, local data protection, international data protection. And one of the challenges in data protection, localization policies within a specific jurisdiction may restrict cross-border data transfer. This is one of the challenges in data protection. Now, how can we safeguard data in cross-border data transfer?
So one of the things that I had said before was that it's very important to find out what each country stipulates regarding data access, data storage, data retrieval. Now, as much as possible, if you have a country where there's cloud access is permissible, and you want to move data across those countries, it's important to establish what data can be moved and what cannot be moved. If it's a country where, for example, the data is localized, it has to be physical storage and cannot be moved out of the country, then the question is, what kind of data do we then need? What purpose do we need it for in that sense? So as much as possible, I think it would be identifying what the purpose of that data is used for. As much as possible, also determining to what extent that data can be analyzed, in which case it might be easier to transfer. So for example, if you need data on attendance practices, for example, within a country, that data is stored on a physical server. Now, you may need to analyze that data to be able to put it in a useful form to be able to transfer it. So in which case, it now becomes less targeted at individuals and more of a holistic information. So you're not necessarily transferring Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C's attendance records. You are transferring the analysis of all of their attendance records. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. Yes, it does. Okay. I have another question for you. Please, everyone, get ready your questions and ask our speaker. So my second question is on the area of international and local compliance in recruitment and employment. So I want to ask, what are the implications of the General Data Protection Regulation on international recruitment and employment practice?
What are the implications on what exactly? Sorry.
International recruitment and employment practices.
Yes.
Based on data protection. Okay. On data protection now, it's still on data protection, but in the compliance aspect in recruitment and employment. Now, my question is, what are the implications of the General Data Protection Regulation on international recruitment and employment?
Okay, so from what I understand is, how can all of these various data protection laws impact on international recruitment?
Yes, and employment.
Okay, well, first, I think one of the things in some way it may limit access. It may limit access because, for example, information that you take it for granted may be available depending on the country's laws or whatever. However, if you look at it on the other side, those laws exist to protect the employees. And the whole idea is, what exactly do you need that data? Which was why, going back to the previous question that you asked, is it a case of us needing to analyze the data as such that it can be transformed into a more anonymous data source in that sense? In which case, it may not necessarily be subject to data privacy and protection because that information has been converted. Do you understand me?
Yes, I do.
There are positives and negatives if you look at both sides. At the end of the day, I believe that at the end of the day, it's about protecting the employees, protecting even the countries and the companies themselves, because you can never tell what data can be used for if you don't place guardrails on them.
That's true. That's true. So I have a last question, but let me open the floor for anyone that has questions. Please, you can ask your question. Okay, there's a question for you here on the chat group. The question says, how does culture shock and differences affect international and cross-border recruitment?
Very interesting question. So, one very key thing that companies need to do, or companies do, not all companies do, is before you. Okay, so it's in two perspectives. So, a company wants to send an existing employee into a new country, or or a company is already there operating in that new country, and they want to attract somebody from outside that country who may or may not necessarily be a national. Cultural and cultivation training is very, very important. I can't remember what I was talking about when I cited, I was talking about interviewing, for example. It's very, very important to understand how people work, how culture affects how people work in certain countries. So, for example, quite a number of Nigerian banks have made inroads into other African countries. In Nigeria, many of them are very bullish, very frontal,
This is the
very,
lowest number ever.
for lack of a better word, aggressive and abrasive in how they relate with staff. So staff are highly driven. Profit is, always the focus. There's almost always an unspoken, whatever it takes to get the objective met kind of mentality. And they've gone into some other African countries where things are not necessarily as fast as this. And they've tried to use the same approach, and they failed because they realized that culturally those people are not like that. So the resistance has been there. What could have served them better is if they had done a bit of cultural and cultivation training to first of all establish what kind of work culture is evident in these locations that we're sending people to or that we want to operate in. And how can we prepare ourselves for those kind of countries? So it's not even just employees, because in many cases the employees will travel to new countries with their spouses, with their children, and these are trainings that should be made available to the families as well, because once they may not necessarily be working in those new countries, they have to live in those countries and they have to interact with people, nationals of those countries. So it's really, really very key to make sure that you prepare people in advance to make themselves ready to face it.
Stuff everywhere, full everywhere.
I hope that answers your question.
What do they want us?
Yeah, the question is for Lepo, is one of our guests and attendees. Okay, I hope that answers his question. Please, can we drop our question? Any question from anyone? You can ask your question. You can mute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sadiji Bello. It's the question I would like to ask our guest speaker is: do you believe it is okay to bend the rules sometimes if it will benefit the company?
And the other thing we are affected.
Can you add a bit more context to that?
What I mean by that,
If you don't get up again.
So
many people, yes.
you make lecture
That's another thing. We are doing next time.
these African countries
We just use
generally all over the world.
what
What I'm trying to ask is that
Zoom
believe
or use
it should be okay
things on.
to bend the
Don't
rules
everybody
sometimes for those companies if it benefits the company.
I wouldn't necessarily say bend the rules. Maybe the word is adapt. So it will be important to adapt to those locations, because the reality is that if you come in trying to adopt state practices from your home country in a new location, they will resist you. Like the example I shared with banking companies and their experiences in many of these African countries. The national will resist because, for example, they know that you cannot just pick up and fire them. So it's important that whatever practices that you want to transfer into a new location, you adapt it to that new location. I wouldn't necessarily say or tell it that you bend the rules.
Okay, Tajuddin, does that answer your question?
Yes,
All right. Any other questions? So, Mr. Bubemi, I have one last question here, and it's on local compliance. Um, so, how do Nigerian labor laws regulate the employment of expatriates? Because if you check most of the manufacturing companies in Nigeria, we have a lot of expatriates, and some of them, if you check very well, their documentations are not complete. Even when you talk about compliance, most of them are not complying with our Nigerian labor laws. So, how do Nigerian labor law regulate the employment of expatriates, and what are the implications for recruitment strategies for our expatriates?
Okay, currently, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not quite sure the Nigerian labor law addresses expatriates. If it does not address it in full. So the Nigerian labor law we have now has been in existence for years. It's currently being reviewed. I think in the last about 3 to 5 years, it's been undergoing like a massive review. Largely also because that labor law was designed for more for sort of like blue collar workers, technical workers, as against a lot of professional workers. So the labor law itself in Nigeria is quote unquote deficient. What we have had is a few other laws that have, with regards to expatriates now, that have that serve to address these things. Let me put it that way. So we have there's the Nigerian content law. There's an expatriate. There's an expatriate policy from the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs or something. I can't quite remember what it is. So we have this like pockets of laws. Now, expatriates ordinarily will be subject to the laws of the land to a certain extent. I would believe it would be to the limit of what does not affect them in terms of their nationality. As much as possible, they have to abide by local law or local practices. Now, what many companies have done is to adopt their handbooks and make sure that the handbooks are as much as possible in tandem with best practices. Not necessarily all companies do this, but some do. So that would be the guide that the expatriates will have to face. Now, if you're talking about expatriate ownership and how they treat local employees, because I suspect that that's sort of like what we are trying to ask. If that's what you're trying to ask, then obviously those labor practices, they have to ensure that they meet minimum labor practices, best practices for employees. So even with the acts like I think the Factory Act, there's an act for social welfare. I can't remember what it is. Social Compensation Act. All these acts, provide directions in various aspects that guide employment practices. So whilst they may not all be condensed under one national labor law, I believe with the review of the labor law ongoing at some point we'll have a comprehensive document that will factor in all these positions from various acts and harmonize them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that answer. Yeah, we have another question from one of. Okay, we have two more questions. So I'll read the first one. The first one says, how can companies effectively attract and retain top talents from different countries?
How can companies effectively attract? Well, you have to sell them a vision.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it. You have to sell them a vision, and not just sell them a vision. You also have to present an opportunity that will be very attractive. So for anybody to leave their country to come and work in another country, in most cases, it's not necessarily just a financial decision. There's something that they are sort of aspiring to. So I worked for a company once that hired someone who had worked someone who was from a West African country but had worked in the UK, had moved to Nigeria and worked with another Nigerian company, sort of global Nigerian company, so she came to work at that company that I used to work with. And when I spoke to her, she said for her, it wasn't just necessarily about the money, but she felt a pull to come and do something in Africa since she was African. So sell them a vision, also, sell them an opportunity. So it's not necessarily the financial compensation that will make them come. You need to sell them that vision. And even when they do come, you need to make sure that whatever promises you have made, you keep them. Now, aside from all of that, you also need to make sure that you support them along the way. So even as little as airport pickup, accommodation in the early days, helping them settle in, attaching them to somebody that can help them understand the environment. All those little things are very, very important, along that process. And then the other question, how can organizations provide consistent environment across different, what typically organizations will have like a, should I call this like a trading register? Like a global opportunities to have like a training database of they expect all of their employees so across whatever skills they or functions to be able to address. In some cases, those trainings will have a customized application or factoring in things like language or stuff like that. So I'm not sure if you're talking about training at the same time, but typically it goes back to the same thing, understanding all of these locations, and adapting whatever training it is to them. So if you're working for, let's say like a Standard Chartered Bank, for example. Standard Chartered Bank exists, in continents across the country. And I'm sure they have like a database of training that they make available to their staff. In some cases it may be not necessarily even physical training, it could be e-learning. And where there's physical training, it could be a case of you pull staff from various locations to come and have training in a central location, or we're having to the local location, we can bring in somebody from head office or from the regional office to come and prepare the training, or we can bring in a local trainer to make sure that the training remains relevant. Depending on whatever the training objectives are, like questions that they need to ask to ensure that they can provide that training across all of these different locations.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Budemi. Thank you. Your presentation is very, very insightful. Want to say thank you. I want to ask, is there any other question before we round it up for the day? Any question before we wrap it up for the day? Okay, in the absence of none, as we wrap up, I want to highlight the key takeaways from today's discussion. Our speaker have provided valuable insight on compliance with best practices, taxation and dispute resolution, compliance with data protection, and many more. Mr. Budemi, we want to say thank you for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this important conversation for this portrait webinar. We want to say thank you. And to our attendees, we want to say thank you. At Portrait Nigeria, we are committed to supporting businesses with innovative and ethical recruitment. So if you would like to learn more about how Portrait can assist your organization, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be very, very delightful to answer any of your queries, any of your questions. So thank you very much. A heartfelt thank you to our speaker, Mr. Budemi, for sharing your expertise and valuable insights today. Your contribution has truly enriched this discussion. And our attendees, we appreciate your time and engagement. Your participation is what makes this conversation meaningful. And we hope you find today's webinar insightful, and we encourage you to stay connected with Portrait Nigeria for future events and recruitment solutions. Thank you once again and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Mr. Bubemi, once again, take your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ITT. Thank you, MD, Dr. Felicia. Thank you very much. Thank you, the Morgan's team. Thank you, everyone. Do have a pleasant day ahead.
It's my man. Those good message. So, how, from where? Who on mute? Mr. On mute. Please, off your this thing, please. Should be MD don't come out. Yeah? Hmm? What's it listen? To people don't come out finish. No be only our staff remain. People they only few people.
I don't say you log out to salary.
Ima,
HR, HR, can we talk now? If you log out to salary for this month.
you dey threaten your HR. If let's say one sack letter, you want collect sack letter.
HR will be the first part of the salary.
You know what? You want easy salary.
Offer man.